I think in those days, you sort of, you know, if your family was working class, oh, well, you belonged to Labour, you see. And if you were sort of middle class or in business, you're expected to be Conservative. It was sort of a bit of a foregone conclusion of sort of which party you belonged to. And of course, in general, politics wasn't talked about much. I mean, the sort of the general theme was, I think the two things you never mention is politics and religion, you see.
I don't think Mother had very much idea about politics, and we never really sort of had a lot to do with it. Dad was more interested, and he was definitely a Liberal. And he used to get really agitated about things when they didn't quite go the way he should. He always took the Daily Herald, for instance, but at that point of time there wasn't a Labour representative round here. But he always took the Daily Herald, and so I grew up reading the Daily Herald. And Mother, well, I never saw her look at a paper, so I don't think she ever took any notice. But my father took a great interest in local councils. He was on the parish council for a long time, 45 years in effect.
You didn't profess to be a Labour person if you was working, say, for a farmer, because he'd say, well, next April, off you go. You would be given the sack.
I know, of course, having the blacksmith shop, a lot of the people that came were farm labourers. They were Labour, and so I can remember my father sort of, you know, having the arguments with the local people, the differences of opinion, as it were.
Because then, as now, the Conservatives are thought of as just being for the upper class, whereas Labour was for working class and middle class more, because I maintain now that this is the difference in the country.
Well, after the war, Clement Attlee became Prime Minister, and of course a Labour Prime Minister. My father was a very staunch Labour supporter, and he instilled upon me, he used to tell me, he used to say there's a large pile of money for the very few and a small pile for the many. And the reason he'd got this view was that, of course, he was basically in service. So his employers, he had to show them, as indeed he would, great respect. But if ever I saw any of them, I had to touch my cap and call them sir or madam. And they thought that with the Labour Party taking over, things would alter for the working man.
I think they were just glad that they thought there'd be more for the working class people, that they'd help the working class people more. Because even though we all appreciate it, I mean, personally, as I said, I was not old enough to really take a big part in politics, but I felt that it was a pity because I'd been brought up with Churchill, Mr. Churchill, and I felt that he'd done so much for the country. But thinking about it after I grew up, I realised that they were all ready for a change. And my ideas, unfortunately, have always been that coalition is good, but I've learnt since that it doesn't work either ways. You just don't get the politics that you think you should. But my dad was quite pleased because, of course, Attlee was the nearest to him because he liked the Labour government.
Why they rejected Winston Churchill, I've never understood that. They wanted a Labour government, I suppose, and he was the head of the Conservative government, and so it had to go. But I've never really understood that, because he was a hero. And to many people then and since, he was the person we looked up to who won us the war, really.
And I think, probably looking back, I think it probably was a shock to the country, because a lot of people really pleased what Winston Churchill had done in the wartime. And I think there was a lot of sadness felt that he'd been ousted from his position after what he'd done for us.
As far as I was concerned, it didn't make any difference, but one felt sorry that he'd been treated like that after such a stirring job he did during the war, because without him, I mean, I don't think we still won the war. I mean, poor old Chamberlain, when he was coming back from Munich with these little bits of paper, peace in our time, well, I mean, he was absolutely being bamboozled all the time.